I still remember the exact moment my world shattered. It wasn't when I lost my job at the accounting firm after 15 years of dedication. It was the look in Charles's eyes when I told him. Those dark brown eyes that once held such warmth turned to ice as he stared at me across our granite kitchen counter, the one he'd insisted we needed for our dream home. "You what?" His voice was quiet, dangerous. The coffee cup in his hand stopped halfway to his lips. "The firm is downsizing," I repeated, my voice smaller than I'd intended. "They're letting go of senior staff to cut costs. I tried to negotiate, Charles. I offered to take a pay cut, but—" "A pay cut?" He slammed the cup down, coffee sloshing onto the pristine counter. "That's your solution? Jesus Christ, Abigail, you're 43 years old. You should be at the peak of your career, not begging for handouts." I flinched at his words, at the familiar tone that had become more frequent over the past few years. When had this become our normal? When had I started measuring my worth through his approval? "I've already reached out to some contacts," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sarah at Johnston & Peters said they might have an opening." "Might have an opening?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Do you know how much this house costs? The property taxes alone." He ran his hands through his salt and pepper hair, the same hair I used to love running my fingers through. "You know what? You don't serve any purpose for me anymore." The words hit me like a physical blow. 23 years of marriage, reduced to my utility value. I stood there, my hands gripping the edge of that damn granite counter, as he continued. "I won't support dead weight. I've worked too hard to get where I am." He straightened his designer tie, a Christmas gift from me, and reached for his briefcase. "I want you out by the end of the week." "What?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "Charles, this is our home. We built this together. I helped put you through business school. No, Abigail." His voice was final. "I put myself through business school. You just kept the lights on. And now you can't even do that." He walked out, leaving me standing in our kitchen, his kitchen now, surrounded by all the trappings of the life we'd built. The family photos on the walls seemed to mock me. There we were in Cancun for our 15th anniversary, his arm around my waist, both of us smiling. The Christmas parties we'd hosted, me always by his side, the perfect corporate wife. The granite counter that had cost more than my first car. I sank to the floor, my back against the kitchen island. The cold tile pressed against my legs through my work pants, the same pants I'd worn to the meeting where they'd let me go. I'd thought that was the worst moment of my day. How naive I'd been. My phone buzzed. A text from my sister Brooklyn. How did he take it? I stared at the screen, tears blurring my vision. How could I tell her that my husband of 23 years had just reduced me to a line item in his life's balance sheet? That apparently, I'd just been downgraded from asset to liability? The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator, the expensive Sub-Zero that Charles had insisted on during our last remodel. Everything in this house was a testament to his success, his taste, his desires. What was actually mine? I got up slowly, my legs shaky, and walked through the house. In our bedroom, his bedroom now, I opened the closet. My clothes hung on the left side, organized by color and season, just as he preferred. I reached out and touched the blue silk blouse I'd worn on our last anniversary dinner. He hadn't even looked up from his phone that night. The magnitude of what I needed to do started to sink in. I had to leave. Not just the house, but this life I'd molded myself into. This perfect facade that had slowly hollowed me out until I couldn't recognize myself anymore. I pulled out my suitcase, the expensive Samsonite he'd bought for our trips to his corporate retreats. Fitting that it would now help me retreat from this life. As I began to pack, my hands stopped shaking. Each item I placed in the suitcase felt like a decision, a choice I was making for myself for the first time in years. My phone buzzed again. Brooklyn. "Abigail, you're scaring me. Call me." I picked up the phone, took a deep breath, and dialed. When she answered, I was surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "Brooklyn? I need a place to stay for a while." There was a pause, then her voice, warm and fierce. "Your room is already ready." As I continued packing, I caught my reflection in the bedroom mirror. The woman staring back at me looked tired, afraid. But there was something else in her eyes, something I hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. I had no idea then that this devastating day would become the first page of the best chapter of my life. I couldn't have imagined that hitting rock bottom would teach me how to fly. But standing there, among the ruins of my carefully constructed life, one thought kept echoing through my mind. What if this isn't the end? What if this is just the beginning? The sun was setting when I heard his key in the lock. He was home early, unusual for him. I was sitting on the edge of our bed, 2 packed suitcases at my feet. The rest of my personal belongings were in boxes, ready to be moved to Brooklyn's. "You're still here," he said from the doorway, his tone suggesting I was an unexpected pest. "I'm leaving tonight," I replied, standing up. "But we need to talk about—" "There's nothing to talk about." He loosened his tie. "Just make sure you leave your house key." That's when something inside me snapped. Not in the way things had been slowly breaking over the years. This was different. This was liberation. 23 years, I said, my voice quiet but firm. 23 years, Charles. Don't you think that deserves more than a dismissal? He turned to look at me, and for a moment I saw something flicker in his eyes. Uncertainty? Regret? But it was gone as quickly as it came. The only thing those 23 years prove is that I've wasted too much time already. Brooklyn's spare room felt like a life raft in a storm. The twin bed with its floral comforter, the mismatched furniture, the small window overlooking her garden. It was nothing like the carefully curated luxury I'd left behind. And that was exactly what I needed. "You look like you could use this," Brooklyn said, appearing in the doorway with a steaming mug of chamomile tea. Her gray-streaked hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and her paint-stained sweatshirt reminded me of how different our lives had become. While I'd been climbing the corporate ladder and playing the perfect wife, she'd been following her passion as an art teacher, living life on her own terms. "Thanks," I murmured, taking the mug. "I'm sorry for disrupting your life like this." She sat beside me on the bed, the mattress dipping under our combined weight. "Stop apologizing. You're my sister." She paused, then added, "Though I have to admit I've been waiting for this day for years." I looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" "Abigail, when was the last time you smiled? Really smiled. Not that perfect hostess smile you've perfected." She touched my hand gently. "When was the last time you painted?" The question caught me off guard. I used to paint. Watercolors, mostly. Landscapes and still lifes that would never hang in galleries but brought me joy nonetheless. When had I stopped? I tried to remember, and the answer hit me like a punch to the gut. "It was right after Charles's first big promotion," I whispered. "He said the smell of paint gave him headaches, and he needed to focus on his career. And you just stopped?" Brooklyn's voice was careful, non-judgmental, but I felt the weight of her words. It seemed reasonable at the time. I stared into my tea, watching the ripples form as my hands shook slightly. Everything seemed reasonable at the time, moving to a bigger house because it suited his image, hosting dinner parties for his clients, remodeling the kitchen again and again because he wanted it perfect. I kept thinking if I just tried harder, if I just did everything right. "If you just erased yourself completely?" Brooklyn finished softly. The tears came then. Not the quiet, dignified ones I'd trained myself to shed, but ugly, racking sobs that felt like they were being torn from deep inside me. Brooklyn held me as I cried, her arms strong and steady, smelling of paint and clay and home. When the storm passed, I felt empty, but somehow lighter. Brooklyn handed me a tissue from the box on the nightstand. "You know what the worst part is?" I said, wiping my eyes. "I don't even know who I am anymore. I've spent so long being Charles's wife, the perfect corporate partner, that I've forgotten how to be Abigail." "Then it's time to remember," Brooklyn said, standing up. She walked to the closet and pulled out something I couldn't see. "Starting with this." She placed a wooden box on my lap. I recognized it immediately, my old art supplies. The box was dusty, but when I opened it, the familiar smell of watercolors and paper brought tears to my eyes again. "You kept these? You left them here the last time you visited, about 8 years ago. Said you'd pick them up later." She smiled. "I figured they'd be safer here." I ran my fingers over the brushes, the half-used tubes of paint. the sketching pencils. They felt foreign and familiar all at once, like meeting an old friend after years apart. I wouldn't even know where to start, I admitted. Start with what you see. Brooklyn gestured to the window. My garden's not much, but it's real. Unlike those perfect magazine-worthy landscapes you used to paint for Charles's office. I winced at the memory. He'd commissioned those paintings, specifying exactly what he wanted. Something impressive for clients to see. When had my art become just another accessory in his carefully curated life? The next morning, I woke early. Something I hadn't done since leaving my job. The house was quiet. Brooklyn already at school teaching her art classes. I made coffee in her small kitchen, smiling at the organized chaos of her space. So different from the sterile perfection I'd maintained for years. My phone showed 3 missed calls from Charles's lawyer and 1 text from Charles himself. Your things are in storage. Unit 147 at Safe Store. Don't contact me directly again. My hands started shaking, but this time it wasn't just fear. There was anger too, and underneath it, something that felt dangerously like freedom. I took my coffee to the garden, settling into one of Brooklyn's weathered Adirondack chairs. The morning air was crisp, the garden still wet with dew. Without thinking too much about it, I retrieved the art box and opened it. The first few strokes were hesitant, awkward. I tried to capture the way the morning light caught the dewdrops on Brooklyn's roses, but my hands felt clumsy, unpracticed. Frustration built in my chest. It doesn't have to be perfect, I whispered to myself, realizing I was hearing the words in Brooklyn's voice. It just has to be real. I started again, this time not trying to create something impressive. Instead, I just painted what I felt. The uncertainty of my new beginning, the rawness of my emotions, the strange mix of fear and hope that filled my chest. The result wasn't beautiful in any conventional sense. The colors were too bold, the lines uncertain. But looking at it, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pride in something I'd created just for myself. My phone buzzed again. Charles's lawyer, no doubt. I turned it face down on the table beside me and picked up another piece of paper. The garden was full of subjects waiting to be painted, and for the first time in years, I had nothing but time. That evening, Brooklyn found me still in the garden, surrounded by paintings. Some were terrible, some showed glimpses of my old skill, but all of them were undeniably mine. Well, she said, looking over my shoulder at my work, looks like Abigail's starting to remember who she is. I looked up at my sister, suddenly overwhelmed with gratitude. Thank you, I said, meaning so much more than just the art supplies. She squeezed my shoulder. This is just the beginning, sis. Just wait until you remember everything else you used to be. As I helped Brooklyn prepare dinner that night, another change from my years of catered meals and restaurant deliveries, I felt something shift inside me. The pain was still there, the fear still very real, but alongside them was something new. A spark of curiosity about who I might become now that I was no longer defining myself through someone else's expectations. I went to bed that night with paint-stained fingers and a head full of possibilities. But I couldn't have imagined then how one chance encounter the next day would change everything, or that my next big opportunity would come from the most unexpected source imaginable. I was organizing my new resume at the local coffee shop when I overheard a conversation that would change everything. The woman at the next table was speaking frantically into her phone, her free hand clutching her hair in distress. What do you mean she quit? The exhibition opens in 3 weeks. She paused, listening. No, you don't understand. These are our biggest donors. If we don't have someone to manage the gallery for this show, we'll lose their support entirely. I tried not to eavesdrop, but something about her desperation resonated with me. I remembered being on similar calls during my corporate days, when everything seemed to be falling apart and solutions felt impossible to find. Well, find someone, she snapped, then ended the call. She dropped her head into her hands, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Before I could think better of it, I turned toward her. I'm sorry, I couldn't help overhearing. Are you looking for someone with management experience? She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but sharp. Unless you know someone with gallery management experience who can start immediately and handle a major donor exhibition, I don't think you can help. I took a deep breath. I have 15 years of experience in corporate management, event planning, and client relations. I've organized charity galas, managed multi-million-dollar budgets, and handled high-pressure situations with demanding stakeholders. I surprised myself with the confidence in my voice. I may not have specific gallery experience, but I'm a quick learner, and I understand the importance of donor relations. She studied me for a long moment. I'm Diana Reeves, Director of the Hillcrest Community Arts Center. And you are? Abigail Adams. I hesitated for a fraction of a second before dropping the Mitchell from my name. It was time to be just Abigail again. Tell me, Abigail Adams, why would someone with your corporate experience want to work at a community arts center? I could have given her a safe answer, something about seeking new challenges or wanting to contribute to the arts community. Instead, I decided to be honest. Because I lost myself in the corporate world, I said quietly. I used to paint. Nothing professional, just for joy. But somewhere along the way, I stopped. I stopped doing a lot of things that made me happy because they didn't fit into someone else's vision of who I should be. I met her eyes. I'm starting over. And helping to run an art center? That feels like coming home. Diana leaned back in her chair, a slight smile playing at her lips. Come with me, she said, standing up. I want to show you something. The Hillcrest Community Arts Center was housed in an old Victorian mansion about 10 blocks from the coffee shop. As Diana led me through the rooms, I saw past the peeling paint and worn carpets to the potential beneath. The high ceilings and large windows provided perfect natural lighting for exhibitions. The smaller rooms could be intimate spaces for classes or workshops. We run on a shoestring budget, Diana explained as we walked. Most of our funding comes from donors and community support. The exhibition in 3 weeks is crucial. It's our annual showcase of local artists and our biggest fundraising event of the year. She stopped in front of a large room that was clearly being prepared for the exhibition. Half-installed lighting tracks hung from the ceiling, and the walls had been freshly painted white. Our previous gallery manager left everything in chaos, Diana continued. The lighting isn't finished. We're behind on artist communications, and none of the promotional materials have been finalized. She turned to face me. Still interested? I looked around the space, my mind already cataloging what needed to be done. When can I start? That's how I found myself with a new job, one that paid less than a third of my previous salary, but filled me with more purpose than I'd felt in years. I worked late into the evenings that first week, learning the gallery's systems, contacting artists, and coordinating with the installation team. Brooklyn was supportive, but concerned. Are you sure about this? She asked one night as I sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by artist portfolios. It's such a big change. That's exactly why I need to do it, I replied, not looking up from the exhibition layout I was redesigning. I spent 23 years being what Charles needed me to be. Now I get to find out who I am. The work was challenging in ways I hadn't expected. My corporate skills came in handy for budgeting and organization, but I had to learn a whole new language, one of artistic vision and creative space. I found myself drawing on memories of my own painting, understanding why certain pieces needed specific lighting or placement to shine. A week into the job, I was staying late again, trying to solve a layout problem that had been bothering me. The evening light streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. I stood in the center of the main gallery, sketching different arrangements in my notebook. You're doing it wrong, a voice said behind me. I turned to find an elderly man standing in the doorway, leaning on a cane. His clothes were shabby but clean, and his eyes were sharp as they surveyed the space. Excuse me? The Chapman piece, he said, gesturing to my sketch. You can't put it there. It needs morning light. The colors will be dead by afternoon. I looked at my layout, then back at him. And you are? Edward Cooper. He shuffled into the room. I used to teach art here, before the budget cuts. Still come by sometimes to see what's happening. He peered at my sketch. You're new. Abigail Adams, I introduced myself. And yes, I'm very new. Would you mind taking a look at the rest of the layout? For the next 2 hours, Edward shared insights about lighting, flow, and the psychological impact of art placement that no manual could have taught me. As we talked, I found myself sharing my own story, about rediscovering my love for art, about starting over. Ah, he said when I finished. So you're not just organizing art, you're living it. I hadn't thought about it that way, but he was right. Each decision I made in the gallery felt like a small act of reclamation, a step toward the person I used to be, or perhaps the person I was always meant to become. As I drove home that night, I felt a familiar flutter of anxiety in my stomach. The exhibition was still 2 weeks away, and there was so much to do. But underneath the anxiety was something else: excitement, purpose, and a growing sense of confidence in my own decisions. I didn't know then that Edward Cooper would become not just a mentor, but a crucial ally in the challenges ahead. Nor did I realize that the skills I was learning would soon be tested in ways I couldn't imagine, particularly when an unexpected name appeared on the final list of exhibition attendees: Charles Mitchell, representing his company's charitable foundation. The moment I saw his name on the RSVP list, my hands started shaking. But this time, the fear was accompanied by something stronger: a fierce determination to prove, to him and to myself, that I was more than the woman he had dismissed. Little did I know, the exhibition would become not just a test of my new skills, but a very public reckoning with the life I'd left behind. And Charles's attendance would be the least of my surprises that night. I spent the next week throwing myself into exhibition preparations, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach every time I thought about Charles's name on the guest list. The gallery was transforming day by day, but so was I. Each decision I made without seeking someone else's approval felt like a small victory. "You've got a good eye," Edward commented one afternoon, watching me adjust the lighting on a particularly striking sculpture. He'd taken to stopping by daily, offering guidance that went far beyond art placement. "I used to think I did," I replied, stepping back to assess the effect. "Then I spent 20 years letting someone else make all the aesthetic decisions in my life." "Ah, but you kept that eye," he said, tapping his cane thoughtfully. "You just turned it inward, didn't you? Learned to see exactly what he wanted you to be." His words hit home harder than I expected. I remembered all the subtle adjustments I'd made over the years: my wardrobe, my hair, my opinions, my dreams, all carefully curated to fit Charles's vision of the perfect wife. "The question is," Edward continued, "what do you see when you look now?" Before I could answer, Diana burst into the gallery, her usual composed demeanor visibly shaken. "Abigail, we have a problem. The Carmichael Foundation is threatening to pull their funding." My heart sank. The Carmichaels were our biggest donors, and their support was crucial for the center's educational programs. "Why? What happened?" "Apparently, they've heard some concerns about our new management." Diana's eyes were apologetic. "Your ex-husband's company has been in touch with them." The room seemed to tilt slightly. Of course. Charles wouldn't just attend the exhibition, he'd try to sabotage it first. It was his way of maintaining control, of showing me I couldn't succeed without him. "What exactly did they say?" I kept my voice steady, drawing on years of corporate crisis management experience. "That you lack experience in the arts world, that you're unstable after your divorce." Diana hesitated. "They suggested the center might be better served by someone from their approved list of consultants." I felt Edward's hand on my shoulder, steady and reassuring. "Well," he said, "seems like the perfect opportunity to show them who you really are." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in Brooklyn's garden, where I'd been spending more and more time painting in the early mornings and late evenings. My latest watercolor lay unfinished beside me, a study of shadows and light inspired by the gallery space. "Want to talk about it?" Brooklyn appeared with 2 mugs of tea, settling into the chair beside me. "He's trying to take this away from me, too," I said quietly. "Just like he took everything else." "Did he?" Brooklyn challenged. "Or did you give it away?" I looked at her sharply, but there was no judgment in her face, only love and concern. "You know what your problem is, Abigail. You're still letting him define you. Even now, you're seeing yourself through his eyes, as someone who needs to prove something." "Don't I?" I gestured helplessly. "The Carmichaels could destroy everything Diana's built here. Then show them what this place means. Not because Charles is watching, but because it matters to you." The next morning, I arrived at the gallery early, a plan forming in my mind. I called an emergency meeting with Diana and the center's small staff. "We're going to change the exhibition," I announced. "Not just the layout. The entire concept. Diana looked worried. We don't have time. We do, I interrupted, pulling out my sketches. Instead of just showcasing the art, we're going to tell the story of what this center means to the community. Over the next few days, we worked around the clock. I interviewed students from the center's art classes, collecting their stories. A teenager who found her voice through photography after years of silence. A veteran who processed his PTSD through sculpture. A group of elderly residents who formed deep friendships in watercolor classes. Edward introduced me to former students, each with their own story of how the center had changed their lives. I documented everything, creating a narrative that wound through the exhibition space, connecting each piece of art to the human story behind it. This is risky, Diana warned. The Carmichaels are very traditional. So was I replied, until I remembered who I wanted to be. The night before the exhibition, I stayed late, making final adjustments. The space had been transformed. Each artwork now stood as part of a larger story, the story of a community finding itself through art, just as I was finding myself again. I was adjusting the lighting on a student's self-portrait when I heard footsteps behind me. Turning, I found an elegant older woman studying the exhibition layout with keen interest. "Mrs. Carmichael," I said, recognizing her from the donor photographs in Diana's office. My heart raced, but I kept my voice steady. "So you're the one causing all the controversy," she said, moving further into the space. I decided to see for myself what all the fuss was about. "Would you like a preview of the exhibition?" I offered, silently thanking my years of corporate training for keeping my hands from shaking. For the next hour, I guided her through the space, sharing not just the art, but the stories behind each piece. I showed her the children's art corner where we'd displayed works from the center's free weekend classes, the veterans sculpture installation, the senior citizens collaborative mural. "Your husband suggested we should be concerned about your lack of experience," Mrs. Carmichael said finally, stopping in front of my own small watercolor, the one of Brooklyn's garden that I'd impulsively included in the community section. "Ex-husband," I corrected gently. "And he's right. I don't have traditional gallery experience. What I have is a deep understanding of what this place means to people who are finding or rediscovering themselves through art." She was quiet for a long moment, studying my painting. "You know," she said finally, "I started painting again last year after my husband died. 50 years of being the perfect corporate wife, and I'd forgotten how much I loved it." She turned to face me, and I saw something in her eyes I recognized. The same spark of rediscovery I'd been feeling myself. "The foundation will double its funding for the next year," she announced. "And I'd like to join your Tuesday morning watercolor class, if there's space." After she left, I sat alone in the gallery, surrounded by the stories we'd woven together. Tomorrow, Charles would walk through these doors, expecting to find me failing, struggling, lost without him. Instead, he would find this, a testament not just to art, but to the power of beginning again. What I didn't know then was that the exhibition opening would bring an even bigger surprise than Mrs. Carmichael's support. Sometimes I think back to that moment and marvel at how the universe works, how the very thing Charles intended to use to hurt me would instead open the door to something I never expected to find again: love. The evening of the exhibition opening, I stood in front of Brooklyn's bathroom mirror, hardly recognizing myself. I'd chosen a deep blue dress, not the designer labels I used to wear to Charles's corporate events, but a simple, elegant piece that made me feel both professional and authentic. My hair, which I'd always kept carefully highlighted and styled to Charles's preferences, now fell in natural waves, strands of silver catching the light. "You look beautiful," Brooklyn said from the doorway. "And more importantly, you look like yourself." I touched the small silver pendant at my neck, a gift from Edward, who'd given it to me that afternoon. "It belonged to my wife," he'd said. "She always said art wasn't just about creating beauty, but about having the courage to show who you really are." The gallery was already buzzing with activity when I arrived. Diana met me at the door, looking elegant and nervous in equal measure. "The Carmichaels are here," she whispered. "And they brought friends." I nodded, trying to project more confidence than I felt. The exhibition space had been transformed. Soft lighting highlighted each piece perfectly, and the stories we'd woven throughout the space created an intimate, powerful narrative. String musicians played quietly in one corner, and the catering staff moved efficiently through the growing crowd. Abigail, Mrs. Carmichael appeared beside me, accompanied by a distinguished-looking man. "This is my brother, Robert. He runs several galleries in New York, and I insisted he come see what you've done here." As I shook Robert's hand, I caught a glimpse of Charles entering the gallery. He looked exactly as I remembered, impeccably dressed, commanding presence, that careful smile he wore at all public events. But something was different. For the first time, I was seeing him through clear eyes. "Excuse me," I said to Robert and Mrs. Carmichael. "There's someone I need to greet." I approached Charles before he could find me first. "Welcome to Hillcrest Community Arts Center," I said, my voice steady. "Can I show you around?" He looked momentarily thrown by my directness, but recovered quickly. "Abigail," he said, his tone condescending. "This is quaint, though I hear there are some concerns about the management." "Are there?" I kept my voice light. "You'll have to discuss those with Mrs. Carmichael. She's just doubled their funding for next year. I believe you know her husband from the country club." The flash of surprise in his eyes was deeply satisfying, but I didn't linger on it. "The student exhibition is this way," I continued, gesturing toward the first gallery space. "We're particularly proud of our veterans program." For the next 20 minutes, I led Charles through the exhibition, professionally and efficiently, treating him exactly as I would any other potential donor. With each step, I felt stronger, more certain of myself. This was my space, my vision, my success. "You've changed," he said finally as we reached the community section where my own watercolor hung. "No," I corrected him. "I've remembered who I was before I started changing for you." Before he could respond, I heard Diana calling my name. She was standing with a small group of people, including Robert Carmichael and a man I didn't recognize. "Abigail, come meet Michael Stevens," Diana said as I approached. "He runs the Regional Arts Council, and he's very interested in our community programs." The man turned, and I found myself looking into the kindest eyes I'd ever seen. He was probably in his early 50s, with salt and pepper hair and laugh lines around his eyes. Nothing like Charles's carefully maintained appearance. "So you're the one who put all this together," he said, smiling warmly. "I have to say, I've never seen community art presented with such heart." "Abigail understands what art means to people." Edward's voice came from behind me. He'd been quiet all evening, watching from the corners, but now he moved to stand beside me. "She knows it's not just about what's on the walls, but about the stories they tell." We spent the next hour deep in conversation about community art programs, education initiatives, and the power of creative expression. Michael listened intently, asked thoughtful questions, and shared stories from his own experience running arts programs in underprivileged communities. I was so engaged in the discussion that I almost didn't notice Charles leaving. Almost. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him standing near the exit, watching me. For a moment, our eyes met across the room. He gave me a small, tight nod. Acknowledgement or surrender, I wasn't sure which. And then he was gone. "Are you okay?" Michael asked softly, noticing my momentary distraction. "Yes," I said, surprised to find that I meant it. "I really am." Later that night, as the last guests were leaving, I found myself in the quiet gallery with Michael. We stood in front of my watercolor, and he asked about it with genuine interest. "It's my sister's garden," I explained. "It's where I started painting again, after everything changed. Beginnings are powerful things," he said thoughtfully. "They take courage. Sometimes they take a push," I admitted. "I didn't exactly choose this beginning." "Maybe not," he agreed. "But you chose what to do with it. That's the real art, isn't it? Taking what life gives you and creating something meaningful from it." We talked until Diana started turning off lights, a gentle hint that it was time to go. Michael asked for my number before he left, not in the smooth way Charles would have done it years ago, but with a kind of honest warmth that made me smile. "I'd like to hear more about your ideas for community art programs," he said. "Maybe over coffee?" After he left, I stayed behind to help with the cleanup. Edward found me straightening chairs, humming quietly to myself. "You know what I see when I look at you now?" he said, echoing our conversation from days ago. "What's that?" "A masterpiece in progress." He squeezed my shoulder gently. "The best ones always are." That night, I walked through Brooklyn's garden before going inside. The moon was full, casting silver light on the flowers I'd painted so many times now. Each painting had been a step in my journey, I realized. Not just back to art, but back to myself. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Thank you for a wonderful evening. Coffee tomorrow." I looked at the message for a long moment, feeling something unfamiliar flutter in my chest. Not the anxiety I'd lived with for so many years, but something lighter, full of possibility. "Yes," I typed back. "I'd like that." What I didn't know then was that coffee would turn into dinner, and dinner into conversations that lasted for hours. I didn't know that Michael's kindness would help heal wounds I didn't even know I had, or that his passion for community art would inspire me to dream bigger than I ever had before. But that's the thing about new beginnings. They often lead us places we never expected to go. And sometimes, the best chapters of our lives start on the very pages where we thought the story was ending. Coffee with Michael turned into the most honest first date I'd ever had. We met at a small cafe near the art center, and within minutes, I found myself telling him things I'd never told anyone. Not even Brooklyn. "I used to check my lipstick and my spoon at restaurants," I admitted, stirring my latte, making sure it was perfect, the way Charles liked it. I didn't even realize I was doing it until I stopped. Michael's eyes were kind. It's amazing what becomes normal when we're trying to please someone else. "What about you?" I asked. "You haven't mentioned relationships." He was quiet for a moment. "I was married for 12 years. Sarah died of breast cancer 6 years ago." He smiled sadly. "She was an art therapist. Actually started the program I still run at the Children's Hospital." The honesty in his voice, the way he spoke about his late wife with love rather than pain, touched something in me. Here was a man who knew loss, but hadn't let it make him bitter. But just as things were beginning to feel comfortable, life threw me another curveball. A week after our first date, Diana called me into her office, her expression serious. "The Regional Arts Council is offering us a major grant," she said. "It would fund our programs for the next 3 years." My heart leaped. "That's wonderful." "There's a catch." She hesitated. "They want you to manage the grant. Full-time, overseeing programs across multiple centers, including working directly with Michael Stevens." The implications hit me. "People will think I got it because of him." "Yes," she said simply. "They will." I spent that evening in Brooklyn's garden, painting angry splashes of color that matched my turbulent thoughts. That's where Michael found me. Brooklyn must have let him in. "I hear they offered you the grant position," he said, settling into the chair beside me. "Did you have anything to do with it?" I asked directly. I recused myself from the decision. He watched me add another aggressive stroke of red to my painting. "The committee chose you based on what you did with the exhibition. They were impressed by your vision for community engagement." I put down my brush. "But people won't see it that way." "No," he agreed. "Some won't. Just like some people thought Sarah only got her program funded because she was my wife." He leaned forward. "She did it anyway, because the work mattered more than the gossip." "I can't go through that again," I whispered, "being seen as someone who only succeeds because of her relationship with a man." "Then don't date me," Michael said simply. "If the job matters to you, take it. We can put whatever this is on hold." I looked at him sharply. There was no manipulation in his offer, no passive-aggressive undertone like I would have heard from Charles. Just honest support for my choice, whatever it might be. That night, I couldn't sleep. I found myself going through old photos on my phone, something I'd avoided since leaving Charles. There I was at countless corporate events, always perfectly styled, always slightly behind him. The perfect corporate wife, as Mrs. Carmichael had said. Then I found a photo I'd forgotten about. Me at 22, fresh out of college, standing proudly in front of my first apartment. My hair was a mess, my clothes were cheap, but my smile was real. That girl had dreams of her own. The next morning, I walked into Diana's office. "I want the job," I said, "but I have conditions. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into developing the grant program. I insisted on complete transparency about the selection process, made sure every decision was documented and reviewed by the board, and worked twice as hard to prove I deserved the position. And Michael? We decided to keep seeing each other, but carefully, professionally. No public displays of affection, no using his first name at work, no special treatment. It wasn't easy, especially when all I wanted to do was share my excitement about a successful program or seek his advice on a challenging situation. The gossip started anyway, of course. I heard the whispers, saw the looks. But something was different this time. I was different. Let them talk, I told Brooklyn one evening. They're not in charge of my story anymore. The real test came when I had to present our first quarterly results to the Regional Arts Council. Michael sat at the far end of the table, deliberately distant, while I walked the board through our achievements, challenges, and plans for the future. Halfway through my presentation, an older board member interrupted. Ms. Adams, your relationship with Mr. Stevens raises some concerns about objectivity in fund allocation. I took a deep breath, feeling the old anxiety rising. But then I remembered that girl in the photo, the one with the messy hair and real smile. My relationship status isn't relevant to this discussion, I said firmly. What is relevant is that our community art programs have reached 300 more students this quarter, including 50 veterans and 70 at-risk youth. I'm happy to provide detailed metrics on our impact, or we can continue discussing my personal life. Which would be more valuable for this meeting? The room was silent for a moment. Then Mrs. Carmichael, who I hadn't even realized was on the board, started laughing. Well said, my dear. Now tell us more about that veterans program. After the meeting, Michael found me in my office. That was impressive, he said, leaning against the doorframe. I learned from Charles how to handle boardrooms, I admitted. I just never used those skills for myself before. He started to step toward me, then caught himself, remembering we were at work. Dinner tonight? Yes, I smiled. But I need to finish something first. After he left, I pulled out my phone and did something I'd been avoiding for months. I deleted all my old photos with Charles, except for one, a picture of us at our wedding. Not because I missed him or what we had, but as a reminder of who I used to be and how far I'd come. Then I took a new photo of my messy desk, covered in grant proposals and student artwork, with my own paintings hanging on the wall behind it. This was my life now. Complicated, challenging, and entirely mine. What I didn't know then was that the biggest challenge was still to come. Sometimes the universe has a way of bringing our past and present together in unexpected ways, testing not just who we've become, but who we want to be. And sometimes, the hardest person to forgive isn't the one who hurt us, but ourselves for letting it happen for so long. The call came on a Tuesday morning. I was in my office reviewing applications for our new youth art program when Brooklyn's name flashed on my phone screen. Abigail? Her voice was tight with concern. You need to see something. I'm sending you a link. The email arrived seconds later. It was a business news article about Charles's company. The headline made my stomach drop. Mitchell Financial under investigation for fraud. CEO's assets frozen. My hands shook as I read the details. Charles's company had been running a sophisticated investment scheme, promising impossible returns and manipulating accounts. The scandal was massive, affecting hundreds of clients, including some of our art center's donors. Abigail? Michael appeared in my doorway, his face concerned. He'd clearly seen the news, too. Are you okay? I stared at my computer screen, where more articles were popping up by the minute. I don't know, I answered honestly. I need some air. I found myself walking to the small courtyard behind the arts center, where we held outdoor classes in good weather. Edward was there, working with a group of veterans on a mural project. One look at my face, and he sent his students on break. You've heard, he said, not a question. I nodded, sinking onto a bench. All those years, I managed his social calendar, hosted his clients, played the perfect wife. Was I part of it? Even unknowingly? Edward sat beside me, his presence steady and reassuring. What would you have done if you had known? I would have. I stopped, really thinking about it. I would have been terrified. Back then, I needed his approval so much, I might have convinced myself it wasn't that bad. And now? Now I'd report him myself. The certainty in my voice surprised me. By afternoon, the story had exploded. My phone was flooded with messages from former friends in our old social circle, some expressing sympathy, others fishing for information. Diana called an emergency board meeting to discuss the potential impact on our donors. 3 of our major donors were involved with Mitchell Financial, she explained to the board. They're threatening to pull their support, saying we should have known, given my hiring of his ex-wife. That's ridiculous, Michael interjected, but I held up my hand. They're scared and looking for someone to blame, I said, my corporate experience kicking in. Let me talk to them. Abigail, Diana hesitated. Are you sure that's wise? I'm not Charles's wife anymore, I said firmly. I'm the person who turned their art center around. Let me do my job. Over the next few days, I met with each donor personally. I listened to their anger and fear, shared their sense of betrayal, and then presented clear, detailed plans for how we could move forward. Years of handling Charles's clients had taught me how to manage difficult conversations, but this time I was doing it with authenticity rather than carefully scripted perfection. To my surprise, all 3 donors agreed to maintain their support. One even increased their commitment, saying my handling of the situation had restored their confidence in the center's management. But the real test came a week later when I found Charles sitting in Brooklyn's garden, waiting for me. He looked different, haunted somehow. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair unkempt. Gone was the polished exterior he'd always maintained. How did you get in here? I demanded. Brooklyn let me in, he admitted. I begged her. Abigail, I need your help. I almost laughed. My help? After everything? You know these people, he said desperately. The donors, the social circle. If you spoke up for me, explained that you never saw any signs of fraud during our marriage. Stop. My voice was quiet, but firm. You're asking me to lie for you? Not lie. Just help them understand. Abigail, they're going to take everything. The house, the cars, everything we built. Everything you built. I corrected him. You made that very clear when you threw me out. Remember? I served no purpose anymore? He flinched. I was wrong. I see that now. You were always better at handling people than I was. More genuine. That's why they trust you. They trust me because I tell them the truth, I said. Even when it's hard. Even when it hurts. I looked at the garden around us. The roses I'd painted so many times. The quiet space where I'd rebuilt myself piece by piece. You know what I learned after you left me? That everything I thought I needed from you, confidence, worth, purpose, was already inside me. I just couldn't see it because I was too busy trying to be what you wanted. Abigail, please. His voice broke. I don't know who I am without all this. In that moment, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, exactly, but understanding. He was where I had been, lost, stripped of the identities we'd hidden behind. I can't help you lie, I said gently, but I can tell you what helped me. Find out who you are when everything else is gone. It's terrifying, but it's worth it. How? He whispered. Start with the truth, I said. All of it. Then rebuild from there. After he left, I sat in the garden for a long time. Michael found me there, respecting my space but offering silent support. You okay? He asked finally. You know what's strange? I turned to look at him. A year ago, seeing him like that would have shattered me. Now I just feel free. That night, I painted into the early hours. Not Brooklyn's garden this time, but a self-portrait, something I'd never dared to do before. In it, I was looking forward, my expression both vulnerable and strong. Behind me were shadows of who I used to be, but they didn't frighten me anymore. They were just part of the journey that brought me here. What I didn't realize then was that this encounter with Charles wasn't just closure. It was preparation. Life was about to offer me a choice that would test everything I'd learned about who I really was and what I really wanted. And this time, I would need to trust not just my strength, but my heart. The letter from the San Francisco Arts Foundation arrived on a rainy Thursday morning. I sat at my desk, staring at the heavy cream envelope with its gold letterhead, remembering the grant proposal I'd submitted months ago, before Charles's scandal, before everything changed. They want me to head their community outreach program, I told Michael later that evening. We were at his place, cooking dinner together, something I'd never done with Charles, who preferred restaurants or catered meals. Full creative control, triple my current salary, and a chance to implement programs across the entire West Coast. Michael's hands stilled over the vegetables he was chopping. That's incredible, Abigail. Congratulations. But? I could hear something in his voice. No buts. He resumed chopping, maybe a bit more forcefully than necessary. It's an amazing opportunity. You'd be incredible at it. I watched him work, appreciating how different he was from Charles. No manipulation, no subtle pressure, just honest support, even when it might hurt him. I haven't decided yet, I said quietly. He put down the knife and turned to face me. Abigail, you can't turn this down because of me, or because of what people might say about you leaving right after Charles's scandal. I know. I moved to stand beside him, picking up a pepper to slice. But maybe I need to figure out what I want, not what I should want. The next morning, I found Edward in his usual spot in the courtyard, working with a young veteran on a sculpture. San Francisco, eh? He said before I could speak. News traveled fast in our small arts community. How do you know what's right? I asked, sitting beside him. I've spent so long doing what other people expected that sometimes I can't tell the difference between opportunity and escape. He was quiet for a moment, watching his student work. You know what I see in your paintings now? That wasn't there 6 months ago? I shook my head. Roots. He pointed to my latest piece, hanging in the courtyard, a watercolor of our art center, with the community gathered for an outdoor class. Every brushstroke shows connection, belonging. That's not something you run from. It's something you build on. Later that day, I visited Brooklyn, finding her in her classroom after her students had left. Paint splattered her clothes, and she was humming as she cleaned brushes, so different from the corporate world I'd left behind. Remember when we were kids? She asked, not looking up from her work. And you used to say you wanted to change the world? I was thinking smaller then, I laughed. Usually about saving stray cats. No. She turned to face me. You were thinking bigger. You just got convinced that bigger meant more money, more status, more power. She gestured around her classroom. Sometimes bigger means deeper, more impact on individual lives. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the quiet streets until I found myself at the Arts Center. Using my key, I let myself in, walking through the darkened galleries until I reached my office. On my desk was a framed photo from our latest community exhibition. I was surrounded by students, the veteran who'd found healing through sculpture, the teenager who'd discovered her voice through photography, the elderly painter who'd found connection through our classes. Behind us hung their artwork, each piece telling a story of transformation. My phone buzzed. A text from Michael. Can't sleep either. Coffee? We met at our usual cafe despite the late hour. The place was empty except for a young barista who knew us well enough to start our orders without asking. I turned down a job offer today, Michael said as we settled into our usual corner. The National Arts Foundation. They wanted me to oversee their East Coast programs. I stared at him. Michael, why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't need to think about it. He reached across the table, taking my hand. Abigail, I love what we're building here. Not just us, but the whole community. I've done the big institutional thing. What we have here, it's real. It matters. But San Francisco, I started, would be an amazing opportunity, he finished, if that's what you want. But don't do it because you think you should, or because it's impressive, or because you're trying to prove something to Charles or anyone else. I looked at our joined hands, thinking about how different this was from any conversation I'd ever had with Charles. No pressure, no manipulation, just honest discussion between equals. When I left Charles, I said slowly, I was running away from something. Everything I've built here, I built because I was running toward something. I'm not finished running toward it yet. The next morning, I called the San Francisco Arts Foundation and declined their offer. Then I walked into my office and started drafting a new proposal, one that would expand our programs throughout our own state, building on the connections and community we'd already created. Diana found me there hours later, surrounded by papers and sketches. "I heard about San Francisco," she said. "You're sure about this?" I showed her my draft proposal. "I want to build something here, something that lasts." She read through my plans, her smile growing. "You know this means more work, more challenges, more late nights?" "I know." I looked around my office, at the artwork covering my walls, each piece representing a life touched by our programs. But I think that's what I really wanted all along. Not to be important, but to be involved. To matter. That evening, I added another element to my self-portrait. A background filled with the faces and artwork of our community. No more shadows of the past. Just the vibrant reality of the present and the promise of the future. What I didn't know then was that my decision would lead to an unexpected opportunity, one that would challenge me to combine everything I'd learned about art, business, and most importantly, myself. Sometimes the biggest dreams aren't the ones that take us farthest from home, but the ones that help us build something extraordinary right where we are. Life has a way of coming full circle, but rarely in the way we expect. 6 months after turning down San Francisco, I was back in the corporate district of our city, wearing a business suit for the first time in over a year. But this time, I wasn't there as someone's wife or employee. I was there to make a difference. The Mitchell Financial Building? The security guard checked my ID. 14th floor. It felt surreal, walking into the building where Charles had once ruled. After his conviction, the company's assets had been liquidated, the building sold. Now I was here to meet its new owners. The 14th floor had been transformed. Where there had once been imposing mahogany doors and expensive artwork, there were now open spaces and community message boards. The reception area displayed local artists' work, including one of my own watercolors, though the receptionist didn't know that as she led me to the conference room. Ms. Adams? A woman in her 60s stood to greet me. "I'm Patricia Montgomery, CEO of Community First Bank. Thank you for coming." I recognized her name from the news. She'd made headlines for transforming a traditional banking institution into a community-focused organization that prioritized local businesses and social initiatives. "We've been following your work at the Arts Center," she said as we sat down, "particularly your recent expansion of community programs. That's actually why we asked you here today." She slid a folder across the table. Inside was a proposal that took my breath away. Community First Bank wanted to convert the entire first floor of the building into a community arts and business center. "We want to create a space where local artists can showcase their work, where small business owners can get support, where the community can come together," Patricia explained. "And we want you to run it." I stared at the proposal, my mind racing. "You want to combine business support with arts programs?" "Exactly." She smiled. "We've seen how you've managed both the creative and business aspects of the Arts Center, how you've built partnerships, managed budgets, and most importantly, created real community impact. We need someone who understands both worlds." As she talked through the details, I felt a strange sense of rightness. Everything in my journey had led to this. My corporate experience, my rediscovered creativity, my understanding of both the business and human sides of community building. "Can I think about it?" I asked. "Of course." She handed me her card. "But there's someone else you might want to talk to first." She opened the conference room door, and there stood Edward, leaning on his cane and grinning. "You knew about this?" I asked as we walked to a nearby cafe. "I'm on their community advisory board," he admitted. When Patricia mentioned what they wanted to do, I knew exactly who they needed. Over coffee, he helped me see what I'd already felt. This wasn't just an opportunity. It was a chance to create something unique. A place where artists could learn business skills, where entrepreneurs could embrace creativity, where community could thrive. "But what about the Arts Center?" I worried. "Talk to Diana," he suggested. "I think you'll find she has some ideas about collaboration." He was right. Diana didn't just support the idea. She was excited about the possibility of partnering the two centers, creating a pipeline for artists to develop both their creative and professional skills. Michael's response was equally supportive. "It's perfect for you," he said that evening as we walked through Brooklyn's garden. "You don't have to choose between your past and your present. You get to use everything you've learned to build something new." 2 months later, I stood in what had once been the imposing lobby of Mitchell Financial. The space had been transformed. Local artists' work covered the walls, including pieces from our Veterans Program. Small business owners mingled with artists at our opening event, sharing ideas and building connections. Brooklyn students had created a mural for one wall, a tree with roots spreading throughout the city, its branches reaching toward the future. My own latest painting hung nearby, no longer a self-portrait of isolation, but one of connection. Me surrounded by the community we'd built, each face and artwork telling its own story of transformation. "Quite a change," a familiar voice said behind me. I turned to find Mrs. Carmichael admiring the mural. "Everything changes," I replied. "The trick is making sure it changes into something better." She squeezed my hand. "You did good, Abigail. You built something real." Later that night, after the last guests had left, I found myself alone in the space that had once represented everything I'd lost. But now, looking at the artwork, the community bulletin boards, the warm and welcoming atmosphere we'd created, I felt only gratitude for the journey that had brought me here. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Proud of you. Dinner at home?" Home. Not Brooklyn's spare room anymore, but the small house we'd bought together, with a garden for painting and a studio where I taught weekend art classes. Not a showpiece like my house with Charles had been, but a real home filled with creativity, laughter, and love. As I gathered my things to leave, I caught my reflection in the window. I hardly recognized the woman I'd been 2 years ago, the one who measured her worth by her husband's success and her ability to meet others' expectations. The woman looking back at me now had silver in her hair and laugh lines around her eyes, paint stains on her sleeve despite the business suit, and a confidence that came not from perfection, but from authenticity. I thought about Charles, wondering if he'd found his own path to redemption in prison. I hope so. Not for his sake anymore, but because I'd learned that everyone deserves the chance to rediscover themselves. Outside, the city lights twinkled like stars. I remembered standing in Brooklyn's garden that first night, terrified of what the future might hold. I couldn't have imagined then that losing everything I thought I wanted would lead me to everything I really needed. My phone buzzed again. A photo from Michael of our dinner prep in progress, complete with an artistic arrangement of vegetables that made me laugh. This was love too, I'd learned. Not the carefully curated perfection I'd once sought, but the messy, authentic, everyday kind that made me feel more like myself, not less. As I drove home, I thought about the young woman in that old photo, the one with messy hair and real dreams. I hadn't lost her after all. She'd been there all along, waiting for me to be brave enough to become her again. Sometimes the hardest part of finding yourself isn't the journey outward, but the journey back to who you were before the world told you who to be. And sometimes the greatest love story isn't about finding someone new, but about finding yourself and then finding someone who loves the real you. I pulled into our driveway, seeing the lights on in our kitchen, knowing Michael would be there, probably making a mess and calling it artistic expression. Tomorrow, I'd return to the community center we'd created, continuing to build something meaningful. But tonight, I was simply coming home, to myself, to love, to the life I'd chosen, not the one chosen for me. And really, isn't that the best kind of ending? Not an ending at all, but a beginning that keeps unfolding, one authentic moment at a time.